Welcome into this segment of Behind the Pen presented by mostvaluablepodcast.com. If you want to listen to the full podcast, go to blogtalkradio.com/mostvaluablepodcast. Also, we're on iTunes, so check us out there as well. Thank you all for listening as always, and enjoy the show.
This podcast is brought to you by Most Valuable Podcasts, leading the league in podcasting entertainment.
Welcome in, my friends, to another episode of Behind the Pen. My name is Mike Rankin, and I will be your host for today's show. And today, I am joined by the one and only Dave Oster.
What's up, everybody?
How are you, Dave, from the Fast Break? My goodness, it's so great to have you on.
I'm doing great today. How are you?
I'm excited to talk Bears, Bulls, and Major League Baseball in this edition of Behind the Pen. If you're listening on blogtalkradio.com/mostvaluablepodcast, thank you. Stick around for the entirety of this podcast. If you're on YouTube, what's up, guys? Drop a like, comment down below, subscribe. If you haven't already, this is going to be a Chicago Bears segment to start the show. And Dave, I had you on because I know you and Mark had a conversation with the Chicago Bears regarding, a plethora of different topics, but I wanted to get your take because I always do this with somebody new on the show on what's going on in the Chicago Bears. And really the big news is the quarterback position. I want to ask, we're going to talk about a lot today regarding the Chicago Bears. First, it's going to be that quarterback spot. And then we'll probably move on with playmakers that have to step up this year for the Chicago Bears because there's plenty. And we're going to go from there as well as Dowell Loggins because, oh boy, we got to talk about Dowell Loggins. But I want to ask you this question because we don't have to really break down the mindset of Ryan Pace in drafting Mitch Trubisky at number 2 overall. However, what do you think this is going to be in terms of how Mike Glennon plays out, Mark Sanchez plays out, and Trubisky plays out in 2017?
I think it's an unofficial competition going into training camp. Whether they want to admit it or not, Trubisky has a good stir of positivity around him already after just the rookie mini camps. For someone who hasn't had as much time on the field, he's only led his team to one season, and honestly, it was always the question of how quickly can he catch on to things at this level. Will the game speed mess with him? Can he pick up every signal he needs to? And on the other side, you have Mike Glennon, who we know what he did in Tampa. He eventually got replaced. And honestly, I still have some hope for him being a stable backup quarterback of the future and a decent placeholder for now. But I think, honestly, it is kind of like a behind closed doors. It's a flat out race for a quarterback. Mike
Glennon as a stable backup. That's what you're giving him?
Yeah, that's all he is.
That's
the top end.
That's all Mike Glennon is, a stable backup quarterback.
Yeah, he's a quarterback whisperer, man. What do you think happened to Jameis?
Well, hey, all right. So Mike Glennon's situation in Tampa Bay really started off rocky because he had to play for Greg Schiano as an awful head coach, and then he got benched for Josh McCown because for whatever reason, Lovie Smith thought McCown was good.
Bringing the band back together.
And of course, they're going to draft Jameis Winston, and you're not going to play above Jameis Winston, number 1 overall pick. So Mike Glennon really never got his opportunity in the NFL, and now he got his opportunity with the Chicago Bears, and I wonder how much conversation was had between he and Pace in terms of their plans of the future, because apparently they gave him the idea that he was going to be the guy, which he will be this year. I mean, we can safely say that it's Mike Glennon's team this season, but boy, signing a 3-year deal, 1 year guaranteed, he may have saw the writing on the wall, but I don't think he saw the Trubisky signing coming.
No, I think that came out of left field. He was fairly surprised, and so were most people. I mean, we honestly figured, okay, we'll get a quarterback in a later round. We'll develop him over time. We're okay enough with Mike Glennon. And like you said, we haven't maybe seen him at his peak yet. He was still very young. Now he's got a couple years under his belt. He is going to be a fairly confident quarterback who I expect to come in day one and be able to start for us no problem. But the question for me is always going to be like, how high is his top end? How much further can he give us from what we saw earlier in his career?
Yeah, and right now, I don't know how you expect the Bears to be in terms of wins and losses next season.
Not so hot.
Not so hot. I think 6 would be the win cap for them going into next year.
That would be a fantastic season,
6-10 with this schedule as well. I mean, it's a tough schedule, and obviously it's a week-to-week basis. The NFL changes over time. A lot of variables going into that, but the Bears have a lot of holes still, and they're still trying to figure out who's going to be mainstays and who can contribute on a regular basis. But when you look at the quarterback position right now, they're going to run with Trubisky sooner or later, and I don't think it's going to be very soon. And if I were to bet, and maybe I'm a betting man, I don't know, but I would probably bet that Trubisky doesn't see a snap at all this season. I mean, I'm going out on a limb, and I'm thinking
that is a bold call.
It depends, though. If he does eventually get a snap, it has to come in the last 3-4 weeks of the season, because I mean, it wouldn't make any sense otherwise. I think right now it's Mike Glennon's team. I think Mike Glennon, when you talked about it in terms of his age, technically this is kind of the age where quarterbacks enter their prime.
This is prime time.
And he hasn't really had an opportunity to really showcase what he can do. His skill set, very, very stable is what I can tell. Is he's a pocket quarterback. He's not going to be really mobile. He's accurate underneath. The intermediate throws he can make. His deep ball is all right, I guess. I mean, I'm not really going to grade him. He didn't have really many opportunities. He threw, I don't know how many weapons he had in Tampa. I'm not really going to look it up here. But with the Bears wide receiver core this year, there's a lot of variables going into that one too. Is Kevin White going to stay healthy? How is Cam Meredith going to play out? Or
is he our number one wide receiver?
Probably.
Yeah.
Marcus Wheaton's coming in, and they have guys like I'm blanking. We'll get back to it later. Let me look at this Bears roster here. But it's like, does he have the weapons to succeed in this Bears offense? I think really the interior offensive line's good. The running game is good. I like what they did kind of with Tariq Cohen in the draft. I think the idea is solid, especially with Langford and Howard there. But this is Mike Glennon's team, and it's his opportunity to play for the Bears, showcase in front of the rest of the NFL that he can be a valuable quarterback. Because right now, the NFL and the starting quarterbacks in this league, it's kind of mind-boggling how many different teams are going in terms of where they want to establish that position.
Right. I mean, the big thing is if you don't have your franchise quarterback, you're going nowhere in the NFL. And the Bears are in a state where we're still looking for that guy. We were hoping it was Cutler for the longest time. We never got things to click the way we had hoped. So we're moving on, which is fine. I'm cool with a fresh start. Glennon is a guy who, he had a year and a half of play, year off basically on the bench. And then he got a single game worth of snaps in Tampa last year in garbage time, where he actually didn't look bad. Like, he had 10 of 11 for a touchdown, and he moved the ball. But again, that's garbage time against Atlanta. I mean, we all know how well Atlanta's defense pans out at the end of a game. But my thing here, I just tossed that in there.
Had to fit that in there.
I just did. My thing here is, like you said, he's a very accurate passer in the short game, and to be fair, that's probably what's going to be the Bears' bread and butter this season, because we don't have an established deep threat who's going to be consistently there for us. I think we're going to rely heavily on both screen passes, bubble screens, and just short slants out, because we don't really have, unless Kevin White, surpasses all expectations and is able to play a whole season and is able to stay healthy and, consistent, we're not going to have that deep threat that we, really need to balance out that offense. So I think Mike Glennon with a conservative offense and a heavy dose of that run game, honestly, that's about the best thing you can ask for this year while you're developing Trubisky in the background. I am extremely concerned about if Trubisky gets time to play this year because of what we saw with Jared Goff and his development last year.
Boy, he didn't look good.
He was thrown to the Lions, and honestly, that it's not quite as bad as the old Carr days back with the Texans. That man was absolutely massacred. His NFL career is over before it started because of the punishment he took in his rookie year.
And Goff didn't have any offensive line help at all.
And that's the problem. But he also didn't have any wide receivers. And that's kind of where I see the fear factor for someone like Trubisky, where it's like you don't have a stable wide receiver who you can work with every week. Cam Meredith is someone who honestly lived above expectations last year and became our number one unofficial as the season ended. So I think one of the best things that we're going to see out of this year is Mike Glennon kind of finding out. We're going to filter through. We went through and grabbed a lot of undrafted wide receivers, some free agents. And I think we're going to filter through those throughout the first probably month of the year, maybe the first half of the year. And if we're completely out of it by, the last 3 games, yeah, I'd be okay seeing Trubisky get a couple shots in there. But that's kind of where I feel like a little wishy-washy about it, too.
And the wide receiver that I was trying to figure out the name of, that's Kendall Wright. See how irrelevant. Gosh.
Say from the Titans, right?
Yeah, right. And so, I mean, they're stable guys. There are names. there are names that you recognize on this Bears roster and the wide receiver crew, but
I say,
right.
No, he's on our team for a reason because he didn't live up to what he was supposed to do.
Hey, you know, maybe he develops
reclamation projects.
A repertoire with Glennon, and you mentioned a lot of good stuff there. And speaking of Kevin White, he's a guy that and eventually we're going to get to in guys that have to step up this offseason. He hasn't played in 2 years. He's a first-round draft pick. He's got to stay on the field, and this is really a big year for White to develop, and for Pace's sake, I hope he does. But there's a lot of opportunity going on with this Bears offense because there are guys who are fighting for opportunity, right? Yeah. And maybe this is the best case scenario for a team that really doesn't have any expectations going into next season, and you have a lot of guys fighting for their jobs, and maybe some step up. You mentioned Cam Meredith. He stepped up a huge last season as a go-to guy in terms of the wide receiver core. And back to Trubisky. Trubisky as the third. I mean, look, you have Mark Sanchez there. He's a guy who works really well. I mean, you talked about his value with Dak Prescott last year. He works really well as a backup quarterback. He understands the game well.
And honestly, he never has been awful downright. You know, I think a lot of it was he had that early success on the Jets that built him up, and a lot of us knew that was
arm.
He had a strong arm, but a lot of us knew that was the defense carrying him and him playing a conservative game based around that run game and short passing. Let's be honest, the Bears aren't going to blow anybody out with their passing game anytime soon. So I think him as a stable veteran on the bench and holding the clipboard, I'm happy with that.
It's a smart signing.
Absolutely.
And Mark Sanchez is smart with the X's and O's, and you know it's very valuable to have a guy that you can sit next to as a starting quarterback and be like, all right, what did you see? Because I didn't see this. And you go over it and you learn, and that's really what...
and he's got years of experience doing that.
Absolutely. So that's a valuable signing. I like it with Mark Sanchez. But back to the Trubisky thing, and we'll move on now to our next conversation regarding the Bears, and that's his relationship with Dowell Loggins. And last season, the first 4 weeks, Dave, that was awful in terms of game management. I mean, you would have Jordan Howard or Jeremy Langford run for so many yards early, and this even goes further into the season, maybe 8 games deep. And they wouldn't feed him the ball. He would run 17 times in a game in which he should have had at least 10 more carries.
Absolutely.
And then they laid it on whoever was starting, whether it was Brian Hoyer, Jay Cutler for a time. Oh my gosh, it was awful. Barkley, bad. So it's Dowell Loggins' second season. Was there anything that you took away from last year that would convince you that Loggins could have a good season this year?
Honestly, and you talked a little smack about it, my boy, but Barkle's over there.
Bad.
I love him.
Bad.
I think we got to see some fun at the end of the season, and I can't tell if this was Dowell Loggins just saying, you know, boys will be boys and let him go out there and play, or if this was his offensive scheme, but I did see a little bit of hope towards the end of the year. I think he finally, someone like smacked him up behind his head and went, you do realize that Jordan Howard is like the second best running back in the NFL right now, right? Maybe we should give him the ball some more. Just tossing it out there for you. And honestly, it was kind of sad that it took that long to get to him because, like you said, it would be like we established the run game in the first half. Second half comes, and we get a whole lot of passing, 3 and outs, and we're not able to move the ball. And then it's like fourth quarter hits, panic time sets in, and all of a sudden our offense starts to move again. So I think we saw it in spurts out of Loggins. I still don't think he's my guy. I don't like him going forward as a long-term solution to help develop a quarterback in Trubisky, but I think if we're going to make a switch and do that, it's going to be at the end of this year if he can't prove himself. Mm-hmm. This is the, like, show me why we should let you mold our quarterback of the future year. Yeah, if he can't do that, he can't put out a successful game plan with the weapons we have on the field and with Mike Glennon out there, then there's no way I want him tainting anything to do with Mitch Trubisky.
Sure. And that kind of goes back to really his role in this offense. I believe he was a quarterback's coach with Adam Gase.
Initially, yes.
Yeah, and then took over the role, and really John Fox said, hey, you know, our offense isn't going to change that much. Well, it changed a lot, actually. It wasn't really that similar to Adam Gase. I guess the philosophy was somewhat the same, right, because intermediate throws are what you're throwing to, but I mean, it wasn't, the flow wasn't there, not a lot of continuity on the offense. I mean, it got better later on in the season, but when you have Matt Barkley at the helm, you're not going to see a lot of production. So, I mean, it is what it is at that point, but you mentioned it. I'm not really convinced that Dowell Loggins is the guy to develop a quarterback, but I don't know because I haven't seen enough of him, and this is really his first test in Trubisky. John Fox isn't going to develop a quarterback. He never has in his career, and that's not going to happen. And he, by the way, is probably on the hot seat going into this season. And that, I mean, if you don't see any progression or there's similar storylines as the Bears suffered from last year and there's regression, steps backwards, I mean,
if we somehow are worse than last year.
That's not going to happen. There's no way. There's absolutely no way unless the whole team gets hurt. But, you know, John Fox, like I said, he's going to be under the microscope this season for sure. On his third year in the 4-year contract that he signed. But really, Dowell Loggins and Mitch Trubisky, how is he going to get along? And I've been reading a little bit in the Sun-Times that Trubisky, you know, he's a fast learner, and I think that's why the Bears are really excited about him. I also read that Ryan Pace, and this was why it was kept under wraps for so long during the draft process, Ryan Pace sent his 2 best scouts out to watch a pro day or a workout from Trubisky, and it was like one of the first days in the offseason draft process, and they fell in love with him immediately. They came back to Pace, and were like, this is our guy. We got to get him. He says, okay, that's it. And that was it. There was no leaks. They didn't talk to the press at all about him.
Yeah.
And they didn't even have a conversation with Trubisky because they didn't want the idea that, well, if we're interested, we don't want it to get leaked for other teams. And then the Bears pounced on draft day. So I give kudos to Ryan Pace in that attempt because really, as a Chicago Bears fan, and for those who have been fans for so many years, this franchise has never done something like this ever before. No. So the point I'm trying to make is there's a lot riding on this Trubisky pick, and if you're going to hand it over to Dowell Loggins, I don't know how I feel about that.
I completely agree with you. And the biggest concern, like overall, is how this Bears team will continue to, you know, evolve and move forward with Dowell Loggins as the head coach or as the offensive coordinator, and John Fox is the head coach. And, you know, it almost feels like a kick, you know, looking back at him, be like, maybe we should have just gave the reins to Gase and hope that he would have done well with it, because I'm watching what's going down in Miami and being like,
he's the right choice. He's the right choice. But, you know, hindsight obviously is 2020.
Of course.
Going into it, the Bears had an idea with John Fox, obviously rebuilding a franchise. You want an established veteran guy to turn that awful excuse for a franchise that was the Chicago Bears after 2014 into something relevant. And they're getting there, right? It's starting to take shape. This was a very ballsy draft from Ryan Pace.
No, I think he's putting a lot of his own credibility on the line too, because
absolutely
we've seen horrible drafts from the Bears in the past. You know, we've talked about it. I can't remember if it's on this show or on Fast Break or what. Any show.
Yeah, we talked about it. Only one, that's Kyle Long. He was the only one left.
One guy
from
remaining
2011
from
to 2013.
Past drafts, and it's just incredibly disappointing.
Awful.
And that kind of explains the whole situation of the Bears. And like one simple sentence is, Bears can't draft, therefore the Bears won't win games.
Right.
And that's it.
And that's what it is. You know, you see teams built through the draft. I mean, Seattle's the prime example. When they went to back-to-back Super Bowls, it was draft picks carrying them on the defensive end to get them there. But
Atlanta did the same thing this past year. They've continued to build up that defense, add speed, add quickness. Offensively, they made that big play to go get Julio Jones years back, and watch how much that has paid off for them. So I think the Bears were kind of like, this is our all-in move, and we better get returns on this, or else we're all going to be looking for jobs.
So many people had negative grades on Mitch Trubisky. Like, it was just a bombardment of bad reviews on Ryan Pace's draft pick to take Trubisky there. And I mean, it had its domino effects, because in round 2 they had to trade back to get more picks, or else they would have been really screwed throughout the entire draft, because they needed to fill so many roles. And you know, the pick that was acquired in the second round ended up being Budda Baker, a safety that was on the Bears' radar for sure. So now when you look at the Bears roster, and one more final thought on Trubisky before we move on, is that he's a quick learner, like I said, and he's picking it up. I know it's only rookie minicamp right now, but he's not making the same mistakes twice, and that was being written in the Sun-Times. I think it was Adam Johns. If he's a big fan of the show, I don't want to mispronounce his name.
Of course.
Right? By the way, shout out Sean Anderson. He's his voice is popular. The Philadelphia 76ers video. Anyway, so I mean, you feel good more and more about the Trubisky pick as time progresses, but we're not going to know for another 2 to 3 seasons potentially.
Absolutely.
Thank you guys for sticking around for this segment of Behind the Pen. If you want more Most Valuable Podcast content, click on the video up above, because I don't know why you wouldn't want to keep listening to our voices every day. But again, guys, thank you all for listening. We really do appreciate you.